and welcome to the Plenty of Positivity podcast. I am your host, Courtney Beck, and today we have Dr. Meghan Waldron.
Hi.
Dr. Waldron is an adjunct professor, an academic advisor, and a small business owner. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Meghan Waldron.
Hi, thank you. I'm so glad we're able to connect and to be here today to chat with you.
I am so excited for this, Meg. So we have a lot in common. We love education. We love teaching. And that is exactly, like I said, your titles. That's exactly what you encompass and your passion for helping students through your business. And I just want to mention it. We'll certainly get into a lot of details in it. But nevertheless, Smart Solutions Tutoring, which is incredible. I know growing up, there was certain topics, if you will, or just areas of like disciplines that I needed help on. So tutoring was definitely my lifeline. So I could certainly tell stories about how powerful tutoring is. So I can't wait to jump into that. But why don't we start off with an introduction and a background of yourself?
Yeah, sure, Courtney. So I am an educator through and through. I first started off not thinking I would go into education. My mom was a PE teacher. So I grew up around teachers and I said, I'm going to do something different. So I actually went to college and studied English and Spanish, but quickly found myself in San Diego teaching. So I decided to come back and earn a master's in teaching and to go into the classroom. So was a classroom teacher starting in 2000 in a district right outside Washington, D.C. We had 81 languages spoken at that high school. So it was really just an awesome introduction to teaching, and I knew nothing. So I never student taught. I was kind of, building the plane as I was flying. But I made some of the greatest friends. We still travel together, 25 years later. So I was in the classroom for about 15 years. I have 3 sons. So when my oldest son was born, I took a hiatus and I was home for about 10 years with them until my youngest went to kindergarten. And during that time, I founded Smart Solutions. So it was a way for me to keep my skills up, to continue to work with students, but to do it in a timeline that I was able to be home with my boys. So that's kind of how it all started. And I did think I was just going to go on that trajectory, but I'm actually married to a teacher as well. So I'm locked in at this point. No escaping.
That is so exciting. And there really is. There's something about education, the fulfillment of teaching. I love to watch students at the beginning of class. If you're bringing up a topic that may be new to them, but then by the end, they are just so excited to learn more. You could see it on their faces. So I just love that. You mentioned, though, I just have to go back because I thought that was fascinating. So you said students within, I think it was 81 different languages.
Yeah.
So how was that experience? How did you adapt? And do you speak other languages too?
So I speak Spanish, but I joke that I speak like 3rd grade Spanish. I got a lot better when I was there because we had so many students who were coming from various Spanish-speaking countries. I really think I learned so much in those first 4 years. And that's why I now, at this point in my career, am just a huge advocate of experiential learning. You really don't know anything until you're in the trenches, kind of going through the work. So you can read all the theories and all the pedagogical, information, but until you're really doing it, you just don't know. So, I still keep in touch with some of my students. I went to one of their weddings a couple years ago. So, the students that we had there definitely had a lot of barriers in regards to their education. And we actually had a nursery in our high school. So I had students who would drop their children off and then come to 9th grade. So that was a huge learning curve for me in terms of how to meet their needs at a very young age. I was only 21 myself at the time. So it really, now when I reflect back on those 4 years, it really introduced me to so many of the needs in education that we're still working towards today. I wasn't aware at the time. I was just trying to get day to day, but I think that it really was a strong foundation, and it's what's kept me in education.
No, that's incredible. And you said, I mean, truthfully, an extensive background in academics, in education, but K through 12, you have nearly 2 decades. So I would just love to start there. What were some maybe trends that you had seen within those years? Maybe things that you saw within K through 12 during your time?
Yeah, so I really specialize, I would say, with our tutoring company. We work with students 4th through 12th grade. My wheelhouse is definitely like middle school and up, but we have some other instructors who work with the little guys. But I mean, definitely over the years, we just saw such a dip in reading skills. So the more technology that came out, the more, students were really strong with technological skills in some regards, not in all regards. But we just saw a huge dip in reading skills, reading comprehension, and then obviously that translates to writing skills. So I think with the advent of technology, there were a lot of pluses in the classroom. Students were more engaged, but I would argue that a lot of our education became gamified. And so when students really had to kind of dig in and do the work and go through the stages, I teach writing, through the stages of the writing process, that was really tedious work for them. And it's not as fun as playing a Kahoot and some of the other things that they're doing in class. So I think the biggest trend that I saw, Courtney, is that students were not getting really individualized feedback back on their writing. So the old school way, you would write a paper, your teacher would give it back to you, it'd be all marked up. You kind of go through those edits. And those days were kind of gone in some regards. Teachers were still giving feedback, but rubrics became mainstream. And so that personalized feedback and working through the various drafts kind of was a struggle for a lot of students. So that is really where our company came in and really looked at how can we bring back some of these fundamentals of writing and ensure that students have these skills. Because for me, writing is really just higher order thinking on paper, and students were cutting a lot of corners to kind of just get to this final product. And they were kind of skipping those necessary steps that allowed them to kind of critically think through their arguments.
No, that's such a fantastic point. And, when I think about feedback, there is something about that personalized touch of really spending time one on one with that student, even if it's an assignment that has been turned in, but to take time to really break down their writing in those, pages, obviously, to also acknowledge to their hard work and
Yeah.
their effort. And it takes time for everybody for
Right.
that matter. But it does. I think over time you could certainly see different trends too. But maybe for parents too that are out there listening to this, what is maybe some advice
Yeah.
that you could provide them within like the realm of writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think any way that you can have your student reading is helpful. So, reading does not have to be sitting down and going through an entire novel or an entire book series. But if your kid is into sports, have them read some Sports Illustrated articles. I mean, reading can really come in any form or fashion, and it doesn't have to be formalized. So, I think getting kids reading and getting kids using vocabulary, I think they say you have to use a word 7 times for it to become part of your vocabulary. So that would be step one, is if you can get them reading and get them reading young. And then I really think one small thing that's really helpful, students are really apprehensive to read their writing out loud. But I work with a lot of seniors applying to college, and I always have them read their narratives out to me. They catch 90% of their mistakes when they have that auditory processing. They're like, oh, I didn't mean that, or what, that makes no sense, or I went back into past tense and I'm writing in present tense. So those are tiny, small things that seem, well, getting kids to read, not a tiny small thing, but those are 2 steps that you can kind of use that I think make a huge difference in improving students' writing, whether it's through vocabulary acquisition or through, reading back through their own work.
No, that's fantastic. And I honestly have to say, anytime if I'm writing something, even if it's just a page, you're right, to actually verbalize it out loud, you will catch a lot of mistakes that you just reading without verbalizing it
Right.
out loud, you don't really catch. But I'm so happy that you mentioned that because I do that even at my age now. And I'm
Right.
like, am I the only one that may
I
do
read
it?
every email I send because our brain goes so fast and our hands can't keep up, right? So, and you forget articles, you forget thes and ands and things like that. So it's a life skill. And I tell them, if you do this now and it becomes part of like your daily, when you send an email to your boss or something, you're going to read through it and make sure. I had to write a letter of recommendation last night for a student applying to a program. I read it like 3 times because I was like, is this clear? Like I wanted to make sure I was good to go.
That's such a good point. And, with technology, obviously it's been here, but it is just
Right.
coming full force with AI. And so at the K through 12 level, how could students not substitute, but actually apply that technology to maybe enhance their writing or just their work in school?
Yeah, so AI is not going anywhere, right? So I kind of compare it to probably when calculators came out and they freaked out. It's no longer we're going to have to do the math, in their heads or on paper. It was really interesting, Courtney, being in the secondary setting when the dawn of AI kind of happened a few years ago, and now I'm in higher ed, and to see how those two different worlds embrace AI or don't. So secondary is still, in my opinion, or I haven't been there for a couple of years, but they were freaking out. Like, what are we going to do about this? They were having students write on pen and paper, just kind of going back to old school. the colleges have started minors with AI, there's professional development with AI. And so they're really looking, like you said, how can this be used as a tool to make sure that it's enhancing students' learning versus replacing student learning? So the kind of rule of thumb that I tell students, if it's something you're learning for the first time, you probably should not use AI, right? So if you're trying to learn how to do calculus or you're trying to learn how to write a personal narrative, you need to work through those steps. But if you are practicing material and you are trying to create a study guide or do something like that, that is a great resource for AI. So I had students tell me last week they dropped all their course syllabi into an AI tool. It mapped out like a heat map for them, essentially, of like, these are your busy weeks. These are some weeks where you have some more downtime. So they're getting really innovative with their uses for AI. My rule of thumb is that AI should not generate material. So anything that would be considered like intellectual knowledge. So if they're writing something for class, they're doing a discussion post, like that is not a good use of AI. However, if you are brainstorming something and you're trying to organize your thoughts, AI can help with that structural piece. That's not it doing the writing, it's helping you with the structural organization of it. So I think there's some borderlines. I also think it's super important that students reach out to their teachers to see their policies and their stances, because you might have an engineering teacher that's like all on board, hey, use it to crunch data. And then you might have an English teacher that's like, if I see any inkling of AI, I'm sending you to get it to the academic board or whatever. So I think it's important to kind of know your audience. There was a lot of mumbling this week because a lot of major universities are using AI to scan applications. So of course, students are like, hey, if they're using AI to scan my application, can I use AI to write it? And my answer is no, right? You're not going to get that personal touch in your personal narrative if AI is writing it. Sometimes I'll put a prompt in and I'll have AI generate the answer. And it's kind of comical because it lacks voice. There's no like personal examples. So I think it's also helpful for parents and teachers to like model that for their students to see that like AI can do a lot of cool stuff, but it doesn't replace the person essentially.
So true. And this is a topic I'm extremely passionate about. I think about critical thinking and these younger generations that are coming up and actually literally have AI now. I mean, whereas when I look back, it was, I mean, I still do it to this day, but I love a book, like an actual handheld book, highlighting, writing in it.
Right.
But I say this because as they're coming up, can you just expand upon the importance of critical thinking with regard to AI?
Yeah. So I just think that a lot of times when you're going through the writing process, right, you are brainstorming, you're drafting, you're editing, you're revising, and then you're publishing essentially. So when students work through that process, they are seeing the different kind of tenets that go into writing, those different pillars of like, I need this, and then I need to build on it with this. They need to know how to create a thesis statement and have an argument, and then they need to know how to support that argument with textual evidence. So these are all skills that they're going to need when they go into any type of job, most likely, right? Like if they are trying to sell a product, they need to figure out what the product is, why they're able to sell it, and then kind of those supports as to why said person should buy it from them. So I think critical thinking is one area that I'm very nervous about. I just see more and more, I think having taught middle school students privately and then taught in the high school setting for a long time and now being in the collegiate side, we have really spoon-fed students information. We've chunked materials so much that when you give students a broad topic, they have no idea what to do with it. Something as simple as like, here's, some resources, go find them on campus. It's like, where do I go? Is there a word bank? And like, just go ask somebody, how do I find the writing center, right? So I think those are the skills that I'm noticing that if I don't give really explicit instructions, there is like a deer in headlight look or like a barrage of emails. And that's okay. Like I want my students to struggle a little bit because I think as teachers, we have cut out some of the struggle, and that is really hard for them when there's those broader topics that they have to delve into. So I don't know if I came full circle to the AI piece, but I think AI, again, is a tool, but I think it can also eliminate some of that struggle for students. And the struggle is where the learning takes place, in my opinion.
No, that's fantastic. And you mentioned it too, but like I said, over almost 2 decades from K through 12, now you are an adjunct professor and an academic advisor at that collegiate level.
Right.
So, can you just talk about that experience and certain things that are exciting, or maybe things that even surprised you as you made that
Yeah.
transition?
Yeah, so I've loved kind of moving from the K-12 sector into higher ed and seeing how many commonalities there are, but then it's so vastly different. Like higher ed felt like the wild, wild west compared to being in like a small little, district here in Virginia. But there are so many common threads that I think, a senior in high school is not vastly different from a freshman in college. We're talking about a few months, but in terms of what they're expected to do, it's like light years of separation. So in the role that I'm in at the university, I teach student success courses. So we work with students on how to college, which is like I love, like, that's like my wheelhouse. And I tell them on day one, I understand where you're coming from much more than where you are right now, because the landscape of university is so different from when I was here 20 years ago. So we're kind of longer than that, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. So we're learning together. But I think they're learning how to learn, Courtney. They don't know how to study. Students don't really study in high school, not like how it was done traditionally, or even when we started our tutoring company. Again, there are a lot of modifications in place for students, which are awesome, but those modifications aren't always in place in college. So there's just a huge learning curve. Our classroom settings are much more hands-on and haptic at the K-12 setting. And in college, they're sitting and they're taking notes, and it's auditory, and they're in these lecture halls with 400 students. And that is mind blowing to them. They're like, don't understand how to connect all the dots. They want teachers to provide scaffolded, notes and things like that. And of course, some students have accommodations and will receive things like that. But for a lot of students, they have to figure out how to do that on their own. So I think the hand holding piece is not there. And we actually had a panel come in of all of my former colleagues, and they presented to the academic advisors at our university. And the title of our presentation is High School Might Not Be What You Think. And they talked about like, hey, there's no lockers anymore. And they're like, what? And we're like, our students have never seen a textbook. Everything's on a Chromebook. And those are things like when they get to college, now they're carrying these big textbooks. They don't know how to annotate, like you mentioned. They know how to annotate on a Chromebook, but they don't know how to annotate by hand in some cases, depending on where they went to school. So it's been really cool to kind of see, like, knowing what they came with, and then they come in with this syllabus, and I'm like, oh my gosh, right? Like there's all these gaps. So, I love the teacher down the hall or the advisor down the hall for me was a teacher as well. So we always kind of can joke and commiserate, like, oh gosh, this is going to be a big jump for them. So I've loved being an advisor and kind of walking them through those first few months as they get acclimated.
That's so true. And in the transition, I mean, when I look back from high school to college, something that always dawned on me was in high school, I wish, and maybe some other schools and high schools certainly do this. I don't want to say that they don't, but I wish that there was either, I don't know, maybe it's alumni of that high school, but to be able to come back and say, hey, there's this major, like for example, sport management. I did not know, like, the way that I viewed college at that point in time of my life was the big picture. So
Right.
business, law, biology for medicine. I wish that there was somebody that would have told me that. Is there anything that you're starting to see maybe trending at
Yeah.
the high school level to prepare for
Yeah, I
college?
think so, Courtney. So I think there's one huge trend in high schools that's happening that I'm really excited about is experiential learning. So students are coming out with CNAs to go into nursing, or they're doing some type of pharmaceutical prep work in high school. So they're having exposure to different fields. They're seeing what they like and what they don't like. They're having speakers come in to learn about different, careers, because a lot of times students would trend towards education or business or biology, but they didn't know about all these other nuanced majors that are out there. I think the tricky part is they have to kind of know pretty soon at a lot of universities. So gone are the days of like trying gen ed, seeing what you like. The price tag on universities is high for a lot of families. So students need to kind of come in knowing what they want to do. And that part can be a really big struggle for some students. We also have students coming in with a tremendous amount of high school credit. So we're talking 7 to 10 classes of AP credit. So they're placing out of all those gen eds where before they would kind of feel out, like, do I like the humanities? Am I more into the sciences and making connections with professors? Now they're coming into high school or coming into college at the 300 level. They might have placed out of all their early level math and science gen ed. So there's a lot of benefit because they're saving some money on the back end in college or on the front end in college, but those exploratory kind of ways that you and I probably experience college, it's a little bit different now. So I think they're getting a lot of exposure in high school. I still think there's a lot of growing that happens when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. And it's hard. It's easy to switch majors, but it's hard to kind of stay on that 4-year trajectory, which a lot of students and parents want to do because college is costly for sure.
So, Meg, this is really exciting. We had actually spoke about this, of course, earlier in the conversation, but you founded Smart Solutions Tutoring in 2007. So, could you maybe just elaborate and let the audience know what that is all about and how you were inspired to start that?
Yeah. So when my son was born, I had been teaching full time at that point for about 6 years or so, but I knew I wanted to stay home with him, at least when he was a little guy. But I also knew I wanted to keep teaching in some capacity. So my sister is an entrepreneur. My brother is actually an entrepreneur as well. So they encouraged me to look at forming an LLC and to start a small business. I was up in Northern Virginia at the time, right outside of Washington, D.C. It's a little bit trickier to have a tutoring company up there because there's so much traffic. But we moved to Richmond, Virginia when Charlie was about 16 months, and it was perfect because it's much easier to get around Richmond. And I was fortunate that I met up with another tutoring company that was going much broader. They were franchising, and I was really looking for like a small niche market where I was going to work with private schools and with students who we did across the board tutoring. So we did like math and all the things at that point. So it really kind of just became a labor of love, and I've had it for, well, Charlie's 19, so I guess almost 20 years now. And it's kind of ebbed and flowed with my career, Courtney. I always stayed, once my kids were done, being little, once they were, ready to go to school, I went back to the classroom full time, but I always kept Smart Solutions in some capacity. At probably around, at that point, around like the 2010 era, we went just to writing. So we kind of got rid of chemistry and all the other areas. I've had anywhere between 7 to 30 contractors that have worked with me. So I just use certified teachers. So I'm bringing in people who are just like myself. I have had a lot of moms that wanted to stay home, or dads that were home, or teachers who were looking for extra income. So it really was a win-win because the teachers are able to select their own schedule. They're able to work with the students that they feel they'd be able to help the most. So it's really been a great small business, and it's allowed me to work with countless families and to work with students. We had a student last year. He started as a fifth grader with us. We had a writing center in person. So he started with us, and he graduated as valedictorian last year and went off to Georgia Tech on a stamp scholarship, which is like incredibly competitive. So it's so cool to like kind of grow up with those students and watch them go through the various stages. So it's been awesome. And now my husband and I run it. He's a teacher, as I mentioned.
This is incredible. So you run this company, you are an adjunct professor and an academic advisor. Like, Meg, how do you do this all?
Well, I joke that I would probably be diagnosed with some kind of ADHD, but I think it's like my superpower at this point. I think it's about balance, Courtney. I mean, at various times, like I said, I've had to kind of take a step back and just, have a few students that I'm working with. I love college essay writing, so I work a lot with seniors applying to colleges. I also think when it's something you like doing, it doesn't feel as much like work. There are parts of it that I don't like doing as much, and I know that about myself at this point. So that's where I kind of am able to, select the things that I feel like are going to kind of build me up at this point. There were a lot of hours of tutoring on weekends and things like that, where I didn't want to always be doing that. But as you know, in order to grow a small business, you have to put in a lot of hours and a lot of dedication in times where you don't want to necessarily be doing all that work. But I think I saw the outcomes. I saw our students being successful, and it afforded opportunities for my own kids. I was a single mom during a large stretch of that time. So it really was a financial stability for my family. So I think that was a huge motivation as well.
No, that's incredible. And as I had mentioned, you're also an academic advisor, specifically within pre-health.
Right.
So could you just explain, I think that's relatively as of recent too. So could you just explain your journey into
Yeah.
academic advising?
Yeah, so I during the pandemic went back to school to earn a doctorate. People we were like making muffins. I was like, oh, I'll just keep going back to school. So I had earned an admin certification, and I thought I'm gonna go into administration. I'm gonna be an assistant principal or a principal. And then after the pandemic, I was like, you know what? That's really not my calling. That's not really my wheelhouse. It's not really what I'm very good at, probably. So I started exploring other options and saw an educational leadership program at a local university and decided that's what I want to do. And through doing that, there were two cohorts. There was a K-12 cohort and a higher ed cohort. and we overlapped a lot. And so I learned about all these opportunities at our local universities. And I was like, gosh, high school teachers would be really good at, said positions. So I started adjuncting and teaching student success courses, and I loved it. I loved the autonomy I had with it. I loved being able to teach in the evenings and joke around with students and joke that their parents wouldn't get mad at me, if we talked about different topics. We also, Courtney, had some pretty severe like book bans and things like that come into our district. So I was just seeing a lot of educational changes in the secondary setting. So higher ed, I felt like I could still work with students, still help students in the way that I knew best, but not necessarily have some of the red tape that we were seeing in the secondary setting. So an academic advising job came open and I applied for it, and I've been there since, working with students applying to professional health programs.
No, this is incredible. Like I said, you have just the adjunct professor being in the classroom, but then also, of course, like just the guidance and helping them with direction on the academic advising side, which I really do. I think it has to be so fulfilling to see them from the very beginning. And then, as they go through just their collegiate years and how they grow. I think that's incredible. I mean, teaching is, in my opinion, it is really filled with fulfillment from the beginning of the semester to the end. I love teaching. So, my question for you is, being in the collegiate realm, like where are you seeing education headed? Trends, any types of patterns
Yeah.
that you're starting to catch up with, and if you followed through maybe with making changes?
Yeah, so I guess definitely kind of going back to what we talked about when I was 21 and had that experience working, in the schools without having any educational background at all. Like I learned a lot really fast and cried a lot probably too to my mom. But I really see that universities are embracing real learning and experiential learning. So they want to make sure that students are not just coming out knowing how to take exams well and how to write well, which are important things, but they've gotten in and they've done the work. So I think internships are a huge driver in a lot of universities. They want students to come out with one. My son's a senior right now. We went on a college tour a few months ago, and they're like, we have a mandatory 2 internships while students are here. So I think universities really see the value in building those connections and giving students those tangible skills for when they graduate so that they are more employable. That obviously trickles down to high school, like we talked about. So I think that those are things that are really trending in the right direction. I think there are still areas there is a lot of needed growth. And I think that's where I really focus, is removing barriers for students in education. We still have a lot of opportunities available, but we have a lot of students who are not necessarily reaching those opportunities at the same capacity. And that's because there's limited AP courses in some regions of different states. There's limited IB exposure. So it's interesting being on the advising realm and seeing students come in with just buckets of AP credit from certain regions of our state. And then you'll talk to other students and they'll say, oh, we didn't have AP. Like we could either do it online or we could go to our community college. So there's definitely some discrepancies across the state in terms of what's accessible. So I really am interested in removing barriers for students, and higher ed is tricky. There's a lot of lingo, there's a lot of acronyms, and we have a lot of first gen students at the university where I work, I think 53%. So it really is a goal of mine to make sure that students have access and they understand what's available for them at college, especially if they're the first one going in their family.
No, that's wonderful. And when you do mention internships, even I could remember back when I was in college, internships were, it was a nice additive to have, if you
Right.
will, but it was not necessary. But
Right.
now, to your point, I mean, sometimes it's even multiple internships to have that practical, like applicable knowledge from that classroom. You could have both,
Right.
but there's something to be said about being in a certain position, actually seeing how it works. And so I think that's what's been so interesting as I speak to students sometimes even before class. It's like,
Right.
they're either getting ready for those internships. And I just go back to my time and how things have changed, which I think is good. I think that to have the knowledge in the classroom, but then also alongside of it, before you get that first full-time job, to have those internships, I think so important. So,
Right.
as we move forward, I would love to kind of switch gears because your personal journey, I think, is so incredibly inspiring. So, Meg, for our listeners, if you could just explain your journey, and then if you could mention this 100-mile that you had gone on this journey, which is absolutely incredible. We spoke about it before, but on the Portuguese coastal route of the Camino. So, if you could just
Yeah.
explain your personal journey.
Yeah. So, Courtney, I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but part of the reason when my youngest son was in kindergarten, I was a single parent at that point with 3 young kids that were in elementary school. So I went through a divorce and I have MS. So it was imperative to me that I had really good health insurance so that I could raise my boys and do well, raising them. So obviously with MS, there's a lot of setbacks. You don't really know on any given day how it's going to go. And it was really important to me to kind of keep my MS at bay. And I think it's come full circle in a lot of ways. When you asked about working with pre-health students, I'm literally sitting with students every day that are going to be nurses, that are going to be doctors. So for me, it is such fulfilling work because I let students know I work with students who in these student success courses who are going into pre-health. And I tell them, I was at Johns Hopkins last week. I'm like, guys, I'm going to get an MRI because I want to put a face to, they're learning about these things abstractly, but I want to remind them that there are real people behind these numbers and the work they're doing really impacts families and patients. So I was diagnosed with MS when my son Holden, he's 16. So right after he was born, MS is dormant when you're pregnant. And I was pregnant for a long time between the 3 of them. It's kind of been an up and down battle with different treatments and things that work and don't work. So I knew that when my MS was under control that I wanted to walk the Camino. I have a friend, I did some freelance writing and I wrote about people who had kind of conquered these really cool feats. And she had won an award here in Richmond for being an outstanding teacher. And so she chose to walk the Camino for 40 days with her daughter. So she did that about a decade ago. So when I wrote this article about her, I was like, Wendy, when I am well enough, I'm walking this thing with you. And she's like, I'm holding you to that. Well, she turned 70 this year, and her goal was to walk the Camino at 70. And she remembered that I told her I wanted to walk it. So I made a post on Instagram or Facebook or something and said, if anyone has information, like I'm just acquiring info at this point. And she's like, let's go, let's do it. And we went and had lunch and she was like super inspirational. And I was like, this woman's 70 and she was a volleyball coach at the university. She's a powerhouse. And I was like, I need to get in shape so I can keep up with her. And I'm 48, but she's 70, but I got to make sure I'm good to go. So we went in May and we started in Portugal and walked to Spain and did our 100 miles. And it was hard and it was rewarding and it was awesome. And people always ask, like, was it fun? I'm like, no, it's not fun. Like, it's hard, but it was totally worth it. And I think it's come full circle because my middle son just told me that his goal, he is hoping to through hike the Appalachian Trail. And so he has started training for that about a month ago. So whether or not he'll decide he still wants to do that once he's done with school, we'll see. But I think sometimes when you take that leap of faith, it helps other people know, like, hey, if she can do it, then, maybe I can do that too.
No, that is absolutely incredible. And my question to you is, as you were on this journey, you're just about to finish it. Like when you reflect back, what is something that you learned from that journey, whether it was personal growth, resilience, determination to maybe be applicable to other aspects of your life? But what was something that really stood in your mind that you're like, I'm so happy I did that. And this is what I learned from it?
Yeah, and I know we talked about this another time, Courtney. So I am a recovering perfectionist. I want things to kind of go a certain way and to, kind of how you envision it in your mind. And I got pretty sick on the last couple of days. I really had trouble eating. I'm now in retrospect, I think I just had a lot of inflammation. We were walking 15 miles a day. I think our longest walk was like 17 miles. But the Camino is really humbling. Like you're walking and you're like, I know. I rock. Like, look at me. I'm almost 50. And then you have like a grandma that walks by you, like motoring, and she's like 85 years old. So, I mean, it's pretty humbling, but it's there. You meet the coolest people. So I think from those 10 days, we were only out there for 10 days. And there's people that are doing this for months because it goes all through France and everything too. I think I learned that you lean on other people. So I'm not sure I would have finished without Wendy. She is an extremely positive person. She's a Quaker. She's very devout. So she would say, like, you've got this. She'd look for little signs as we went to remind me that, like, we're good to go. And she wasn't in a rush. She's like, we're going to finish. It doesn't matter if we have to crawl across. Like, we're going to finish at some point. So I think the importance of, like, leaning into other people, letting go of perfection. It doesn't always look the way you picture it looking. Like, all the people have, like, their photos, and we had the photos too, but the story behind the photos, we weren't feeling so great there at the end. And I think the other part is just that you can do things. If you can really visualize something, I think we're pretty much capable of doing anything. Like, if you can really picture yourself finishing, you will finish. I ran the Marine Corps Marathon twice before I was diagnosed with MS. I was notoriously slow, Courtney. I beat my time by 1 second. And I mean, I'm talking like I ran them in like 5 hours. I was not like a fast runner. So I was consistently slow, but I knew my only goal was to not get picked up by the straggler bus. They have a bus that, like, picks up the slow people. And I was like, I have to finish. But again, that was a humbling experience. But I think when you can picture yourself finishing, you're able to finish. And that's something I've kind of carried with me throughout life. Like, it doesn't always look how you're going to picture it looking, but you can get there eventually.
That's such a good point. And I'm glad you mentioned visualization. I have a visualization board, if you
Yeah.
will. But there have certainly been times, of course, in sport where you're right, like setting those short-term goals, long-term goals, but always visualizing what you hope to actually come to fruition. And that really helps you during that journey when things, of course, are not always going as planned, or maybe
Yeah.
it's a little bit more challenging. And so the power of visualization, I think, in life, not just in sport, but also just in your career goals, I think is so important. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Meg. And my question for you next is literally, like, what is next for Meg?
I know you asked me that. I'm like, oh, no, I've set another goal. Like, I was off the hook for a couple of years. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important when you're in a career. I remind myself, like, when students don't want to get up and, like, present something, I'm like, oh my gosh, come on, just get up. It's not that hard. But, like, public speaking is terrifying for a lot of students. But when we're professionals, we do what we're good at every day, right? Like, I'm good at writing and I'm good at teaching writing. So that's easy. But, like, if I went into a calculus class or an anatomy class, like, it would be over. I'd be done. So my goal is to always push myself out of my comfort zone, even when it's really uncomfortable. So even podcasting, like, I like talking about things, but sometimes you're like, oh, what if I, forget what I was going to say, or things like that. So I think it's important for me to keep pushing myself out of my comfort zone, to keep figuring out the next steps, and to keep looking for opportunities to grow and to help other people. Like, I know I'm happiest when I'm working with other people and helping them. And that can look different. There's a lot of guilt for teachers when they leave, like, the traditional classroom and that path. So I think for me, it is continuing to grow and push myself. I think from, like, a sport aspect, I mentioned that my son is hoping to walk the AT. That was a lifetime goal of mine. I recognize it's probably not in the cards, but section hiking is. So it is my goal, if he decides to do it, that I want to do a part of a stretch in Virginia with him. So at least he can call for help, if things go south for me. But yeah, so I think those are two things that I'm hoping to do.
I think that's wonderful. And the fact that you talk about stepping outside your comfort zone, no doubt. Like, I was in my head as you're speaking about podcasting, I had to laugh because even to this day, well past over a year now, but trying to get better each and every time, I always tell people it's that first 2 minutes that I'm so structured, I'm so scripted. And then when you get to know me, you're like,
Right.
who is that speaking? And so I think it's so important to push yourself, in different aspects, whether it is in career or in sport. Coming up, Meg, you're inspiring me. I'm going to try with another girlfriend to go on a half marathon. I can't do the full marathon, but the point is to push yourself. Sometimes we could go so much further than the limits we place on
Right.
ourselves.
Sure.
And so I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
And Meg, this has been truthfully such an inspiring podcast episode, whether we were talking about, trends in education. Your journey is unbelievable. I mean, the moment that you and I had a conversation even before this podcast, I'm amazed. It really is inspiring. But let's round out with a positive message or a positive quote, perhaps, for the community.
Yeah, I thought about, so I love quotes and I go crazy like posting quotes all the time, but I think it's simple for me, Courtney, and I have this up in my office and it just says, know your why. And I'm sure somebody somewhere said it first, right? But I love just kind of coming back to that because it centers me. Because so often when I'm working with students, we're all caught up in the what, like what classes do you need? What do you need to do to pass this semester? What do you need to do to be able to apply? What person do you need to talk to? And they forget why they want to be a nurse, or they forget why they want to be a PA, or I forget why I want to be advising, right? So we get caught up like in the minutia. So I think knowing your why and remembering your why each day is really valuable. And it can be cheesy, right? Like that sounds kind of lame to circle back to it, but I think it's super, super important. So knowing your why is really valuable. And then with that, like one small caveat, I started about a year ago before I walked the Camino. I write down 5 things that I'm happy about, grateful for each day. And sometimes they're really lame. Like I get a new pen and I'm glad I'm writing with that pen. And sometimes you're not really thankful for a lot of things. You have to kind of dig deep. Sometimes you feel like you have more than 5 and you can write those too. But I think kind of framing, what it is that's going well, because it's really easy to find all the things that aren't going well. And then instead of like kind of making that to-do list in your head, which I am infamous for. My husband will tell you I have lots of lists, but knowing the why behind the what, I think is really, really important.
I love that you mentioned that because I feel today we are so busy. It's go, go, go here, make sure you're here at this point. But to be able to kind of stop and reflect, and like you said, focusing on gratitude, the small things, I truthfully believe this. I mean, just with, maturity getting older, but it's the small things. It's the
Yeah.
small things for showing up, with that presence, especially today. Technology's, set aside, but being present with somebody. And then when you talk about your why, I always think about that with, your why helps you through those difficult times because it's easy, like when you're starting something or you get that brand new job and everything's just all, glitter and, but at the same time, when you do hit kind of those speed bumps, so to speak, your why really pushes you through to that end goal. And so I just love that you rounded that out with such a positive and uplifting message for our community, Meg.
Yeah.
So I want to absolutely, yes, I want to thank you, Meg, for coming on. And I want to let our listeners know too, like I said, our first time that we had spoke, you're such an inspiration, whether it was overcoming challenges in your personal life, but then also within education. Your passion, Meg, shines through with education, generally speaking, whether it is in academic advising, adjunct teaching, or K through 12. So thank you so much for coming on to this podcast and sharing your wisdom.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. It was super fun. I appreciate the work you do. It's important for us to be positive in the light of all the negativity. It's important to have that messaging so we can frame our lives a little bit in a different way.
Thank you, Meg.